All right, looks like we've started. All right, Assalamu
Assalamu
alaikum.
alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So should we give a minute for people to come?
Yeah, let folks
Inshallah.
come in. I got a text from one of the viewers on Facebook, whom I don't personally know, but person said the camera is looking down on me and I have to adjust it, so I tried something new.
It's the vantage point of God and the angels looking down upon you. Yes.
Yeah. I also rebooted. I don't remember the last time I rebooted the computer because it seems to have been glitching. So
Yeah.
hopefully some of that will be fixed.
Yeah, I think you're good. Are there any questions or comments from last time that we want to clear up before we or at least acknowledge before we run the video and jump in?
No. A brother from Bangladesh sent some hearts, so that's nice.
Oh, salam. That's beautiful.
Yeah. But yeah, we'd love to keep this interactive. So yeah, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, just type them. Feel free to type them. And don't be bashful. There's no question that can't be asked. And even if it can't be answered, we can think about it together.
That's great. That's great. And then and also we will have some guests joining us here in the next few days, God willing. And so we'll benefit from a wider variety of perspectives, inshallah, not just two bearded men talking all the time. So no offense intended, Dr. Mahan, but so I think that will be refreshing and wonderful to have some additional perspectives joining us, inshallah, in the coming days. But today's night 8, inshallah. Today's night 8. So tonight is we are now more than 25%, through our journey. So this is a milestone, mashallah. So alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Well, look forward to
the mission and vision of the American Islamic College, to me, pretty much now synonymous with the work. I believe in the transformative power of education, and not just education that is informative, but in education that is transformative, education that really changes how we live. But I think that the Muslims of America need a place that they can come as a Muslim space. This is their space. It belongs to them.
All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Bismillah. That video never gets old.
Well, it gets old for me because I'm hearing it, and there are all kinds of things I wish I could supplement, and say, oh well, but well, for now I'll just let it stand on its own, and God willing, we'll have lots of chances to fill in the gaps as we journey forward, and once in a while talk about the college and think about the college and the transformative work and the importance of transformative education in this crazy time of climate change and political circuses and industrial violence and oppression. And so that's but for tonight it's the loving, compassionate, unscripted engagement with this timeless text, inshallah. So is there something that leaps out to you, as we begin? This is our 8th portion, and again, this is again, as you noted last time, that this is a surah from the earlier period of Islam, the Meccan period of Islam, and the one that we're going into tonight in this portion will also be from that earlier period, the Meccan period of Islam. But is there something that leaps out to you that you want to use as a launching pad for our discussion tonight?
There's so many things that come in every juz But even here, one of them we were just discussing previously is, on the rise and fall of civilizations, in a sense.
Yeah.
So that's a major theme. Maybe we can touch upon that. And if we do, there's like 3 verses from the previous juz that will connect really nicely to that 42 to 44 that we had to skip over last time. Then I feel, and I'd like to hear your response on this, that there's something about, if you follow the majority of the people, you will go astray, which made me think about, thinking about political theology. What does that mean? And then shortly thereafter, it says there's a few crooked people always on the top, which is, the former critique of democracy, and then the critique of oligarchy. So what kind of political theology are we getting? And then there's the section on free will, at least that one verse, towards the end of An'am. And then this interesting encounter with the jinn, and a lovely section once again on Abraham, because that was covered earlier in the surah. So those are some of the things in An'am, and those themes continue with the law of nations in Araf. But we go back to creation, and then the address is, O children of Adam, O children of Adam, which changes from, we saw in the previous surah, O you who believe, or O humankind. Now it's O children of Adam, Ya Bani Adam. And then and then there's all the prophets, one after the other. And that's also very instructive to go through each of them just briefly. So lots of stuff here. We could go.
Well, since that the first theme about the rise and fall of civilizations, and how that's also connected to the Quran's sense of prophetic history, that civilizations were
Sure.
sent people to warn them and to guide them, and they didn't listen, and they were arrogant, and then they ended up just being undone, like in a surprise moment, at a moment when they least expected. I think that's a it's a sobering message, but it's a very prevalent message in these 2 chapters that I think is worth exploring. And this exploration, you say, should take us back a little bit in the Surah of the Cattle, back to the last section, and then we'll trace it through. And I do have a couple of interesting points that are less overarching in terms of their thematic significance, but they are some like little jewels that are sort of shining out to me that I want to make sure we at least name before we close tonight. So why don't you take us into rise and fall of civilizations?
Well, it's Surah number 6, chapter 6, verse 42 is what I'm looking at, where it's you, O Prophet. So the Prophet Muhammad is amongst the people, but the Quran will always say, well, look, you messengers have come before you. And so we sent messengers before you, Prophet, to many communities. They're people with suffering and hardship, so that they could learn humility. So here, a question came up last time right at the end on why do prophets suffer. And one answer is, because God loves them. And so in a way, it's so that he can, through their suffering and their acceptance of it, and the humbling that comes with it, comes a nearness to God. So it's counterintuitive.
It's completely counterintuitive, because when bad things happen to us, we always think, what did I do? Like, why is God punishing me?
Right.
And Muslims will respond so differently. They say, oh, God must love you, brother. God must really love you, right? For you to be going through this.
Well, because when if you have ease, you forget God. And people start to think, well, skill and their own intellect, and maybe there isn't really a God. But when you're suffering, you're always thinking of God, because you're in need. And so you're always conscious of that need. And if you reduce existence to this material plane, this world alone, it's incomprehensible. But if you have your gaze on something that this life is really nothing, it's really an ultimate, destination for which you're preparing, then then it can be quite a blessing. But it's completely like you said, counterintuitive.
Yeah, and
So
I was just going to say, stick a little Rumi in there. Maulana says, Jalaluddin Rumi says that those people and things that make you run to God, be grateful for them, and be cautious of those friends who bring you comforts that keep you from your prayer. He said, on the path to God, sometimes your enemies can be your friends, and your friends can be your enemies.
This is why he was called the Persian Qur'an, because we'll read later on in this month that innama amwalukum wa awladukum fitna, your wealth and your offspring are a fitna, a trial. Because out of your love for them, you want to transgress all limits. But you've got to and your love for them can be a distraction from your duty to God. So there can be an adversarial relationship in a metaphysical sense that you have to guard from with these loving relations that you have in this world. So anyways, to continue with this, that these prophets came hardships so that they could learn humility. And the next verse says, when suffering, or if only, I'll read Abdul Halim's translation. It's simpler English. If only they had learned humility when suffering came from us. But no, their hearts became hard, and Satan made their foul deeds alluring to them. So there's a pattern in history, and we'll observe this in the next surah, when one prophet after another is rejected. So, and this is the third verse in the sequence, so when they had forgotten the warning they had received, we opened the gates to everything for them. Fatahna alayhim abwaba kulli shay. Meaning the blessings of this world. They became completely unfettered, unchecked. They acted with impunity. And why? Then as they reveled in what they had been given, that's the أخذناهم بغتة. And so be careful of unchecked power and privilege, that this is the when the rope that God has given you is coming to an end, the leash, and it's going to be pulled back suddenly. Because do you really think you're independent and this will last forever and you can go about doing these things without consequence? I mean, that's the message of the Qur'an.
Yeah, and so, it's a message that is in clear contradistinction to certain political figures who seem to have no consequence and are able to act with impunity.
Yeah, so that was, that was something that was yesterday, and this theme is repeated and developed, and the verses continue. So, encourage you to take a look at them. Then looked at 116. It was really an interesting verse where it says, if I marked it correctly, actually 115 and then 116, the word of thy Lord, of your Lord is complete in truth and justice. Like that's where it finds its perfection. Sidqan wa adalan. No one can change his words. He is the all-hearing, the all-knowing. And if you obeyed most of those on earth, the majority, akthara man lead you away from the path of God. They follow nothing but speculation. And I've been on Twitter these past few years, increasingly. And if you follow the herd, there's so much speculation and just conjecture and going down rabbit holes. That's just a silly example, but people can get into this groupthink and conspiracies. And so here it says they follow nothing but conjecture. They're merely guessing, or they do nothing but lie. And so I wonder what you think about this in terms of, I'm just going to ask it straight up, in terms of democracy. And think of Farabi. I know you did a lot of studies on classical Islamic political theology.
Abu Nasr al-Farabi, and I was first introduced to al-Farabi when I was a student at Notre Dame. So they're in South Bend. And one of the things that al-Farabi says about a democracy is that a democratic society where voting is something that is a shared responsibility of the citizens, they will put into power people who reflect their own souls, and people who promise, either truly or falsely, but promise to give them what they most want and what they most seek. And so he saw democracy as being very dangerous. He said that the democratic city, because he spoke of these different societies as cities, is actually many cities, and the democratic city is actually, of all the cities, is the most difficult city for a virtuous person to live in and to remain virtuous, because it is a city where that offers everything, and so the opportunities for becoming deluded and the opportunities for a government to lead the society in the direction of delusion is so ever present. And so the virtuous city was what he always saw as being the most kind of utopian and rightly guided kind of political union. The virtuous city was a city that acknowledged God, and that acknowledged that this world is a cultivation ground for virtue and for the higher things. And of course, then that comes with with a legal structure that many people will find oppressive, and many people will find difficult to bear. And so, I mean, I think that, and I'm also reminded of the Prophet's hadith, his apocalyptic hadith, alayhi salatu wasalam, when he said that, Islam came into this world as something strange, and at the end times it will leave the world as something strange. So give glad tidings to those strangers,
Right.
And so clearly the reference there is that to be faithful in an apocalyptic moment, when we know that, we're promised that there will be bloodshed and chaos and all kinds of terrible things happening, to be faithful in that moment will mean not to follow the majority. It will mean to be sometimes singular, and to be willing to be a stranger, even in your own community, possibly, when everyone else is following herd. And I think we see the great moral evil, or the great moral danger of following the herd, even now in today's global political climate. It's a dangerous thing.
Right. Yeah. And I'm just thinking people will take this clip, if someone cuts the clip and says, "Oh, the AIC and these guys are against democracy." And I just want to clarify that this is actually Western philosophy, where Plato and Aristotle they recognized that the virtuous city was not democratic, but that, and in Plato's political philosophy, democracy is the least worst. So when monarchy, when it's virtuous, is the best and benevolent, but when it becomes self-interested, it's the most tyrannical. And since you can't, they have low expectations of humanity and monarchy, and so they don't expect to have a virtuous monarch or an aristocracy. They expect to have an oligarchy or a tyranny. So they don't have, and so they say that democracy is the the best because it's the least worst. They don't call it virtuous anyways. And so this is a critique that's along those lines, and not necessarily, advocating for a non-democratic system, but to accept it critically. At least, I just want to make it.
No, but what it seems, but what the message here seems here is that the danger of a democracy is what we see now happening, is that it can erode into populism, and when it erodes into populism in a more oligarchic kind of state, then you have a few people who are in control of the whole thing, and their intentions are not virtuous, and their policies are not virtuous, and they have the especially in today's information age, they have all the tools they need to bring the majority of people down with them.
And this brings us to verse 123. And so we have put, or thus we have placed leaders in every town, its wicked men, to plot and burrow therein, but they only plot against their own souls, and they perceive it. It's pinning it on an elite that somehow takes over and speaks on behalf of everyone, but really is leading everyone to ruin.
Wow. So we're kind of in this realm, as I mentioned a few nights ago. We're kind of in this theater of spiritual warfare, in a way. This struggle, like it's almost a kind of Zoroastrian, struggle between light and darkness kind of picture that we're receiving here. And I remarked on that. I noted in my own study in preparation for tonight, in verse 112, it said that for every prophet, right, we make an enemy, right? That the prophets don't just come down and have to deal with the mess, but it's almost as if there has to be some kind of the force has to be balanced somehow, and so the prophet has to be counterbalanced with shayateen, with these devils, as the Quran says, and these enemies. And so the prophets don't come in neutral; they come into the world with ready-made enemies who are set to oppose them and to mock them and to try to turn their messages into lies and woo the people against them. And so, I mean, I feel like the intervention of prophecy in human history is an intervention that is intended to kind of stir the pot and really I guess create a choice for people who are willing to think and consider. And this is something that the Quran is constantly exhorting us to do, is to, aren't you thinking? Aren't you considering? Aren't you contemplating?
Right. Yeah. And this is, this echoes in mythology, even in older traditions, light and darkness, like a tussle between, the light rises and darkness to meet it. You hear even things like this in Star Wars. And I notice you're wearing your Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yes, Obi-Wan
robe
evening tonight.
Let's do, should we do 125, which is when God wishes to guide someone, he opens their breast lil Islam. And you see the translation as to Islam, and you view that in a very identitarian kind of way. But if you read it literally or linguistically, he opens their heart to submission.
Yeah.
When he wishes to lead them astray, and I have two translations in front of me, Abdullah Yusuf Ali and Abdul Halim. Abdul Halim says, and those whom he willeth to leave astray. So he doesn't lead them astray, but he leaves them straying. This is what it says. وَمَن يُرِدْ أَن يُضِلَّهُ. What does he do? He closes and constricts their breasts as
Yeah.
if they were climbing up to the skies, like climbing a stairway or a hill to the sky. You run out of breath and you're tight.
Yeah.
This is how I understood it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And it's interesting that the heart of the people that open to faith, the heart expands, it opens, right? And those who are either caused to stray or allowed to go astray, their hearts contract and become narrow and
right.
like closed.
So this opens up the question of free will.
Yeah, it does.
But
And the
it's
mystery.
always resolved. So in the end of the verse, it says, "Thus doth Allah." That's one translation. Or
Mm,
this is how God makes the foulness of those who do not believe rebound against them. So actually, they had first made their own choice to reject, and so the constriction happened not from the beginning, but as almost a response to their rejection of the people. But you can keep going in cycles, right? Because God created the people in a certain setting with certain capacities. And so, but as he let them down this path, despite his rahmah, these are tough questions. This is theodicy on good and evil that
yeah.
will remain, mystery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think especially, growing up in America, I think we had this sort of radical free will sense, right? This notion that people are the masters of their own destinies, and that people make their own destiny, and we kind of love that in American film, and and we talk about the self-made millionaires and billionaires, but the reality, if we really look deeply at this picture, nobody makes it on their own, right? And that there's that there's just so many layers. We're born into particular contexts. We're given certain genetic predispositions. Uh, we encounter people in our lifetimes who have unexpected and powerful roles in our own formation and our own journey. Sometimes help comes from unexpected sources, and injury comes from unexpected sources, and there's so many things in our lives that truly give shape to our identity, our emerging identity, and also to our journey that we have no control over. That all the greatest forces in our life that shape us are really forces that we have no control over. And so I at this point in my life, I can't come down completely on either the side of free will or of predestination, but the picture seems much more complicated to me now than it did when I was young,
Yeah.
and gobbling up
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. William Chittick and Sachiko Murata, in grad school, we were introduced to this book, but it was also used in, earlier classes. I call The Vision of Islam. And the whole book is, it's based on the Sunnah, the Hadith of Gabriel on Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. Islam representing the ritual and legal dimension, Iman representing the philosophical and theological dimension, the rational, and then the Ihsan representing the mystical, the spiritual, experiential dimension. And the whole book, the argument is that the intellectual tradition is a tension between tanzih and tashbih, the absolute transcendence of God, that anything you think of God is other than that. So completely other. But then how do you relate? Well, he's closer to you than your own jugular vein. He's with you wherever you are. And this attention are held together without being resolved fully. And this is, in a way, it mirrors that.
It does.
Perhaps, yeah, the tension you highlighted. We have a comment, really profound comment, that hardship from referring to our earlier discussion on when God sends prophets, he also sends hardships to humble
Yeah.
the people. And so the comment is, hardship doesn't transform us if we don't embrace it with gratitude and humility. But also, if we remain in victim mode, that can also harden our hearts.
Sure can.
So just wanted to acknowledge that that comment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Should we do the jinn ayah, or where do you want to go next, or should we jump to Surah Al-A'raf? I see it's already 10:30.
I know. Maybe we should leap to the Surah of the High Places.
Okay.
But you're right. We'll never. I mean, this is an opportunity for us to just scratch the surface and to celebrate this month of the Quran by engaging it in an unscripted way. But we will never be able to do everything. So maybe we should jump to the chapter of the high places.
Okay. Maybe we just start then with verse 4, if that's okay, because it connects to the theme right away. How many towns we have destroyed. So that's the theme that it won't last forever. Our punishment came to them by night, or while they slept in the afternoon. Their only cry when our punishment came to them was, how wrong.
Yeah.
We shall certainly question those to whom the messengers were sent. And I see messages come in all kinds of ways, but there are websites now and commentary, and like, don't say you didn't. We can't claim ignorance of the things that are happening in our name. If Americans knew, or if we knew, well, it's what's happening in our name is very clear. There's no doubt. And so we can't pretend and plead ignorance. So the messengers shall be questioned, but also the messengers themselves will be questioned. I mean, we will question those to whom messengers were sent.
That's
and
right.
then the messengers will also be questioned, is did you fulfill the task you were given to convey? Yeah. So some tough messages here. Go ahead.
Yeah, and the oppositionality that we see, right, between light and darkness, good and evil, is kind of explained here with another reference to Adam and Eve and Iblis or Satan, right? And there's a sense that the source of all of this oppositionality and all of this is really jealousy, right? It's this sense that Iblis, who's believed to be not an angel and not a human, but of another order of being called the jinn, as you know, created out of fire, objected when God commanded the angels to bow down before Adam, something we talked about when we were reading Surah Al-Baqarah, and which is an incredible passage. And he says, but I'm better than him. You created me out of fire, but you created him out of dust or earth. And that's in verse 12 of the high places. And so he's the one then who deceives. And so it's fortunately in the Quran, it's not anybody in particular. It's not Eve's fault, and but it's just the fact that they were deceived, and they ended up sinning, and they became aware of their sin, and then they became aware of their nakedness, and they became aware of their own capacity to do evil, and they immediately seek God's forgiveness. But there's a sense that this oppositionality, this struggle between good and evil, this struggle between light and darkness, is now going to be one of the core themes of human existence until the end of the world. and so we have a whole litany of prophets and their peoples and their civilizations which don't exist anymore because the people rejected what the prophets were teaching them and exhorting them to do.
We have a question here from Dr. Shakila. Yeah. One question is, where does the term God helps those who help themselves come from?
I don't think it's a Quranic verse. I don't.
Well,
Um,
well, there's this. There is a verse in the Quran that says, and Sheikh Hamza and Imam Zaid had a whole program on this agenda to change our condition. That God doesn't change the condition of a people until they change that which is within themselves.
That's right.
So maybe that's a connection, at least in the Islamic tradition. I'm sure we find it in many other traditions. but the Quran also has, if you help God, He will help you. And so that's a really interesting concept itself, is what does it mean to help God? One place in the Quran it will say, if you give God a loan, in tuqridullaha qardan hasanan. And so we'll get to those, but the idea is there. I think it's there in some form or another. Does that resonate with you, Doctor?
I think that's another way of saying, I think the same idea is that God will not change the condition of a people until and unless they change what is in themselves. And so the key to transforming your condition in the world is to transform what's within you. And so and then that transformation then is what precipitates the transformation of your situation in the world. And
right.
So that, I guess one way to say that is that God helps those who help themselves.
Who help themselves. And it's been translated, in all kinds of poetic ways by so many others. I'm thinking of, even we are the one, the line from Obama's speech. It was just really captured. We are the, he was, when he was advocating for change, and he said, now is the time, right? And then he said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Or be the change you want to see in the world, like it's attributed to Gandhi.
That's
the man in the mirror. Yeah.
And I guess the kind of the psycho-spiritual teaching that I guess we have everything we need in this moment, this present moment, everything we need to make the transformation that we crave or that we yearn for. Everything we have is given to us in this moment. And so I guess the indication there is that we have that opportunity to transform ourselves at every moment. And we make excuses and we distract ourselves, and but the ability to pivot and to make that transformation is in our hands right now.
Right.
Interesting.
Dr. Shakila has a second question. I can almost guarantee we can't engage it
Okay.
constructively, but I'll just read it. You mentioned the concept of free will. Every action and reaction is already written in the big book of Allah. Is free will really free will? It's a perennial question. And the way that it's reconciled is God's foreknowledge doesn't mean that He ordained every act, although He creates every act. And the theologians will jump through all kinds of hoops, but ultimately, it's a mystery. and we believe that God won't be unjust. So
In
go
fact,
ahead
we're
if you want to. Yeah.
in fact we're told that in our reading tonight, that God will never deal unjustly, right, with a people. But yeah, no, I mean, this is something that the medieval Muslim theologians spent a lot of time entering into heated debates about, and everyone was using Quranic verses to defend and support their position. But I think this is another one of those places where we have to be willing to live in the tension of the mystery, that somehow, some way, we are responsible for our choices. That's clear in the
Right.
Quran. But it's also clear in the Quran that God is in control, complete control, right? Even in Yusuf's story, and we'll get to that on another evening, when Yusuf is going through, he's sold into slavery and he's betrayed by his brothers and cast into prison and falsely accused. We read in the middle of all this that Yusuf is going through that God was ghalibun. God was in total control of his situation, right? And so we have this tension between whatever God has written. In the Quran will say, inlan yusibana illa ma kataballahu lana, nothing will strike us in life except for what God has written for us. And yet we make choices and we're responsible for those choices. And so somehow we have to find a way to live in the paradox of God's complete power and decree and our personal responsibility for our choices. And there's no way to have one, at least within the context of faith, there's no way to have one without affirming the other. And so we just have to
Right.
live within that tension. That's how I see it.
Good. No, I just got a clarification that that second question was not Dr. Shakila's, so I just want to clarify that on the free
Oh,
will.
okay.
It was from another viewer. But a reference real quick. This is probably,
Sure.
but have you seen The Matrix? Have you seen The Matrix?
Oh yeah. Many
Have you watched
times.
them all?
No.
Okay. You know the second one in which he meets the architect. It was a really interesting scene where he's in this room. And for those of you, if you haven't seen The Matrix, this might sound really weird, but he's in the talking to the architect, and you see him behind him, all of these screens. And as he's dialoguing with the architect, basically the one who's written the computer code, and they're in this kind of coded world that called the Matrix. Before he responds, all of his possible responses kind of flash on the screen, and then it zooms into one that he chooses and acquires. And so, his actions were all created. So we say God creates your acts, but then there's a kind of mystery in the choice that we make and acquire responsibility. I found it was helpful for me to understand a little bit of Ash'ari theology of iktisab. I don't know if it works perfectly, but for those for whom that illusion is helpful, you can check it out.
Yeah. I mean, it's deep and it's powerful. And this theology of iktisab is this idea that we acquire responsibility for the actions that God creates through us. So it's just like,
Right.
it's crazy ambiguous, right? It's just, it's
Right.
and in the mystical realm, right? I can remember in Imam Ghazali, writing he says the highest level of affirming God's unity is seeing only God, meaning God is doing everything. God is, and he even uses this language in Arabic, la fa'ila illallah, that there is no doer in the universe except for God. And that's kind of at the peak of his own mystical awareness and his mystical vision of reality, that God is behind everything, God is doing everything. But for those of us on the ground who are far below that level of mystical vision, I think that there's no question that we make choices and we're responsible for those choices, but the extent to which we are really free, like radically free, is I think is appropriately questioned, because there are so many forces that limit the kinds of choices we can make. And there are so many determining factors that create inclinations toward one way of walking or another. And yet the Quran clearly is wanting us to make a choice. That's why it's appealing to us. It's saying, oh, you
Right.
who believe, oh, children of Adam, oh, like we're being told to make a choice. And the people of the prophets, those civilizations that were destroyed, were being told to make a choice. And they were choosing to mock the prophets and to reject the signs and to abuse these messengers and to create traps and create complexities when the teachings were very simple, and to try to trip these messengers up, and clearly the Quran holds them accountable for what they did. It's a tough one.
So it's a tough one, and we're in deep theological territory. We might have to get to, the stories of the prophets tomorrow,
Okay.
because we've got another question that's going to pull us in a theological direction.
Okay.
Sajida Hussein, she asks, but God's mercy is beyond his justice, though, right?
Mm. And mercy is the only thing that God has written. In the same way that God has written fasting for us, it is required, it is ordained for us. God has also ordained rahmah, or mercy, this love. This can only be compared linguistically to the love of a mother, that God has written that upon God's self. And so nothing can
Yeah.
happen outside of rahmah. And even after 9/11, I remember, in working with youth, saying that, no matter how much Arabic somebody has and how much Quran they have memorized and how much hadith they have memorized, if you don't detect any rahmah in their message, it cannot be your religion, because God has written rahmah ala nafsi. God has written mercy and love upon God's self. So nothing
Right.
can be properly understood in this religion outside of rahmah. Nothing. And so I think her point is instructive and
Well,
good, and of course it is sort of conjuring a memory of the Hadith Qudsi, where we read that my mercy exceeds my wrath. This statement, this theopathic statement of the prophets. So
right.
yeah.
I'll engage this too, and there's one more question. Maybe that'll be the last one. But the theologians making statements about rahmah on its own, because of what God has said about prescribing rahmah and the way that you develop it, and clearly there's some priority, which I hesitate to say, and I'll tell you why, to rahmah, because you have it like ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, huwa Allahu alladhi la ilaha illahu ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Like the rahmah is always fronted. Ar-Rahman allama al-Qur'an. We'll see how that plays out in Surah Ar-Rahman. But the attributes of God are always, they come and there isn't a separation, and they're all together complete. So to say that one outdoes the other is something that the theologians would be very careful of constructing it that way. However, I'll go back to the book I mentioned, William Chittick and Sachiko Murata, their husband and wife. Sachiko Murata, she's a Japanese scholar of religion. She wrote her own book called The Tao of Islam, which talks about the names and attributes of God. And it's a very mystical kind of yin and yang reading, where there's attributes of majesty and attributes of beauty, Jamal and Jalal, and then Kamal, like of perfection. So, there's these categories of attributes, and the attributes of beauty, the Jalal, which she identifies with the feminine. She said that the mystics, incline, just like you, Dr. Timothy, on the Rahmah, that the feminine attributes had an edge over the masculine. And so the God, remember now, gender is not, it's
It's linguistic.
gender. It's a linguistic, not a sexual or biological category. So in its linguistic feminine, God is actually a bit more feminine than he is masculine. It's a lovely book.
Mm.
One more question. The last
Sure,
one?
and let's just remember that we're just a couple of bearded guys who are talking about what we think the Quran might be saying. So it's not like we're here to promulgate universal truth that will be binding upon all generations, past, present, and future. We're just sincerely working through these portions of the Quran, and doing it with, obviously, with some Arabic and some training, but we're doing it with inquisitive minds, and so that's really what we're here for tonight.
Okay, well, thank you. That's 100% concur. And then maybe the last question is from Dr. Ejaz Sheikh. He's a beautiful friend of mine here in South Bend. He asked that he was better than Adam because he was created from fire, but he failed to realize that Adam was superior because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God the Exalted, blew his breath into Adam. So actually it's more of a comment, but would you like to reflect on it in any way?
Absolutely, that God gives life to Adam and to all human beings by blowing the ruh into the human form. It's a beautiful point, Dr. Ijaz. And also, of course, we have to go back to Surah Al-Baqarah, where we see that it is only after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after God gives Adam, upon him be peace, gives Adam the knowledge of the names, all of them, that Adam is then placed in a position to instruct the angels, to teach the angels, and then the angels are commanded to bow down and to make sujood before Adam. So part of it could be the ruh, but another part of it is the knowledge that God entrusted to his Khalifa, God entrusted to his steward or his vicegerent. And both of those factors, I think, indicate that that there's something incredibly special about being human, which is not the topic of most Hollywood movies or pop songs. That there's something lofty and luminous about being human, even though most of us are so deluded and so overwhelmed with this dunya that we fail to see it. And so I think that, and again, the angels were right that we also are the source of great corruption and bloodshed and terrible things on the earth. But the statement of God, when he says, "I know something that you don't know," this is the enigmatic statement that I guess drives the spiritual life, because there is something about being human that we ourselves have no idea. We don't even know ourselves as we truly were created to be, and the journey to that knowledge, the journey to that manifestation is the great adventure of human life.
Yeah, and I think this comment, Dr. Jazz, is like puts his finger on the breath of God. وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. There's something there. فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. Like after that breath was blown, then the angels were told to bow down. And so what does it mean to have divine breath? What is that? And there's a debate on ruhi, like, is it God's breath, or is it like breath that God possesses because God is the owner of everything? I mean, there's a subtlety of reading there, but I think there's that ambiguity is there for a reason. We're back to kind of the ambiguous verses, and later on we'll see that the Prophet was asked, "Yes, alunaka anir ruh." He was asked about this ruh, but ruh is from the command of my command of my Lord. That's how the Prophet responded.
Yeah,
And
command
you know, Yeah.
Yeah.
Min amri rabbi, and you have not only very little knowledge. So this is where the mystery, this is the heart of the mystery.
You know, Imam Ghazali also acknowledges another way to read that, and that it's not just by the command of my Lord, it could also be my Lord's business. Like it's my Lord's amr, meaning it's
Oh,
it's God's business,
This is
right?
none of
It's
your
not,
business.
no, right?
Right.
This
Okay.
is among the things that belong to God. This is God's business, and of knowledge you've been given just a little.
Just a little. And this is the topic of your dissertation, the
Yeah,
unspeakable
this is my whole
doctrine of the
doctoral.
soul.
That's why it took me so long. It took me 10 years.
MashaAllah. Well, we're at time. We're almost at a full hour. Thank you all for engaging us today, and spread the word to your friends. You know, we're trying to make this an inclusive space. People who are skeptics or antagonistic or just looking for something different, all are welcome.
Absolutely. And even we have some exciting guests who are going to be joining us soon, and we even have some merch that's coming. We have Qur'an Unscripted mugs that are being developed. So we have lots of exciting things ahead of us in the remaining 75% of this blessed month of Ramadan, inshallah.
Yes, hopefully you get to drink your late night chai in one of those mugs. All right, until tomorrow. Take care.
All right. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. And recite Surah Al-Asr after this. And I think we should switch up the dua, although Surah Al-Asr is what's recommended. But Dr. Timothy will invite you to say some duas in the coming nights because you're a beautiful supplicant. So
inshallah, but tonight we're giving it as homework to everyone who's viewing, right? So,
right.
So everyone, we can recite Surah Al-Asr before we retire tonight, inshallah.
All right.
Okay.
God
All right.
bless
Assalamu
you.
alaikum, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.